message box and someone will ask those to the presenter throughout or at the end, depending on how he allows that to happen. But again, thank you for joining us today for today's session, Community Colleges as Conveners, how to become your region's essential partner. With that being said, I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Patricia Harris at Wake Tech Community College.
All right. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So I have the exciting honor of introducing our speaker or presenter for the morning, Mr. Craig Lamb. Mr. Lamb is the Vice President of Corporate and Continuing Education at Rowan Cabarrus Community College. His responsibilities include training and education projects in support of community, economic, and workforce development. Worker selection, workplace certification, and process improvement are areas of special interest. Craig has committed his professional career to assisting individuals and organizations with improving productivity and quality of life through training. Prior to joining Rowan Cabarrus in 2014, he served as Executive Director of Ivy Tech Corporate College for 17 years, 14 years as Director of Operations for Tecumseh Area Partnership Incorporated, and he also served as the Workforce Investment Operator for the North Central Indiana region. Craig sits on the board of the National Coalition of Advanced Technology Centers and on the Executive Council of the Manufacturing Skills Standards Council. He is the founder of numerous workforce training initiatives, including the Ivy Tech Sigma Institute, the Safe Work Indiana program. He has facilitated the development of employer-based learning networks, including the Rowan Education Collaborative, the Wabash Valley Workforce Consortium, Advanced Manufacturing, and the North Carolina Manufacturing Institute. So we are all excited about hearing from Mr. Lamb. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our presenter of the hour.
Thanks, Dr. Harris. It's great to be with you all. Welcome to my guest room. Looking forward to a fun conversation today about about collaboration. And not just about collaboration, but how to improve your institution's effectiveness at collaboration and how to leverage that for enrollment and institutional success. So I am going to share my screen because I need my slides to tell me what to do. Oops, I shouldn't do that. I do that every time. I'm going to share my content. Do that. And now.
It was up for a second and went away.
It was. Well, see, that's because I'm a nitwit. If you've ever done one of these presentations and embedded a video and found out that you can't get the sound to work, there's a little slider button that says include computer sound. And if you don't click that every time when you're doing it, it will not play the sound, and I forgot to slide that across. So now, if I pay no attention to the man behind the curtain here. Yay, right?
Got it.
Cool. You're all able to see that, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Well, here we go. We're going to talk a little bit about community colleges as conveners. And Monty talked earlier about putting things in the chat, and that's a great way to get things started. I won't see that, so if one of you sees something that's germane, bring it up. If you want to, but I'm not averse to having you bring up a point right in the moment. That's probably the best time to address something. So unless it just slows us down dramatically with this many people, if there's a point of clarification that you think will make it important for you and the others to understand what I just said or what we're trying to get across or how we move on to the next piece, by all means, bring it up. So with that all said, let's get underway. That embarrassing bio at the beginning, I always kind of shirk when people read the bios, but you can sense that collaboration and networking is one of the things that I really enjoy, that I practice, and that I believe has brought success to the institutions and organizations that I've served. And so I want to share a lot of that with you. And I really do believe that we can do a lot more together than we can on our own. The real question is this: why are we talking about this? This is enrollment management. Many of you may play lots of different roles inside your organization, and some of you may specifically do enrollment management, but some of you may run programs or divisions that are looking to have an increased enrollment, or to strategically direct that. And so let's just talk about these, and we can also call them outcomes if you want, because we'll want to make sure that we address these throughout the presentation today. And so these are questions, I think, that framed my thinking around putting this together, and that I hope we'll address. So part of this is around, I thought this was about enrollment management. So how is research influencing perspectives on this work? What's the current thinking about how collaboration and community networking plays into the community college role? And there's some interesting new wave research that's looking into that. And then how is being an essential partner linked to recruitment and enrollment? We'll talk about that. Isn't this someone else's job? Isn't someone else supposed to be doing that? And the answer is probably, you guessed it, it's no, it's yours. And then 3 pieces around action items. How do I assess my institution's reputation as a convener? How do I influence that? And how do I leverage my convener status once I get there to not only be a good partner and a good neighbor and a good community citizen, but to have it benefit the institution through enrollment management? And so these are things that we want to talk about today and address, and hopefully enlighten you on some things that you might be able to do to put into practice. So this notion of enrollment management, to me, is a question that we often address as either being a strategy or a tactic, or at least many organizations and institutions approach it as a tactical issue, and many approach it as a strategic issue. And today we'll be talking about those elements that are part of a very more strategic, much more a strategic approach to enrollment management. It doesn't mean that we have to sit here and have a discussion and have a winner that says, oh, is it a breath mint or a candy mint? Those of you who remember certs, is it a strategy or a tactic? It is in fact both. But I often see a tactical approach only to this kind of initiative, and I wanted to brace up the strategic view. So the tactical view will approach those tactical goals that are things like enrollment, headcount, FTE, program success, the quick, the numeric kinds of outcomes that you're looking for. We're going to move the needle on these, and we need to move it fairly quickly. But for those of us who are also trying to reach goals of diversity, inclusion, equity, access, and overall overarching community success, it becomes more of a strategic issue, and it becomes a community issue more than an institutional issue. And so I think that one of the questions you need to think about when you think about your own approach to this is how the balance between these strategic collaborative initiatives play along with the tactical roles of the traditional things of media and outreach and recruitment and things like that. And so, and some people might even say that some of that would be along with branding and other issues, that's more of a strategic piece. But collaboration is it kind of sits in between those. It represents your brand and it supports your enrollment management tactics, but it is more easily able to address those larger scale, more gnarly problems of diversity, access, inclusion, equity, and community success. And so that's really the benefits that I think from that will come to you and certainly have come to us from those this kind of an approach. I'm going to use my arrow instead of my mouse because that's just jumping around like. Okay. So this was just here to remind me of something. So I'm going to tell you a story about my son's 8th grade track coach, because I always think of this man when I think of the kinds of things that we're trying to do, because we are faced with, if we ended the presentation here and somebody said, what did Craig talk about? You might say, well, he wants us to collaborate more. And so if your boss, whoever that might be, gave you the direction to collaborate more, it's much like the experience that he had. And that was that his track coach would stand at the, imagine the regular running track, and he would stand on the inside, the infield of the first turn of the track. And as each of the young boys ran past, he would yell, as it says at the top, run faster. Okay. And so clearly a coach needs to instill the idea that their overall objective is to run faster, but his job is also to make sure that they understand how to do that. Where do I put how do I use my arms? How do I hold my head? How long of a stride should I take? How should I pace myself? All the different techniques that it takes to actually run faster. And I think that sometimes when we're faced with these uncomfortable situations of saying, well, we really need to collaborate with this group or set up a network in the community that can do that, that's a big jump. And often it feels like someone's just told you to run faster. Someone's told you to collaborate more. And so what we'll be doing in this is telling you ways, practical takeaways that you can use to actually collaborate faster, to move in the direction that you want to, and to use tested techniques. So I hope that at the end of this, you know that you have tools that you can take away and put to work. If you don't, put that in the chat. That's the kind of stuff we should be talking about. It's not the what should I be doing, it's the how should I be doing it? How do I make it happen? So that's what I'd love for us to talk about. But before we get too far into that, we did talk about, well, I guess I forgot about this slide. So let's talk about it. So that tactical and strategic view, the media is often a tactical solution. We're using social media to reach out to different people and different constituent groups. We're making sure that people are aware of our services. We're making sure that they understand what we can do and that we can influence their decision if they are aligned with us. But these collaborations within the community with organizations and groups, some of them that exist already and some of them that you'll have to make, will help build long-lasting, trusting relationships, robust networks that give you assets and contacts and information and connections that you need in order to move forward. And it can build trust within your community and practice. And so just like the tactical And strategic question is not a who wins, which is it kind of question. Just like that, media also, I wanted to make sure that we address the idea that we are talking about the notion of combining these approaches in order to drive awareness, participation, collaboration, and then to awareness, action, prospects, those kinds of things. So one does not refute the other. So this is an interesting, didn't know we were going to do chemistry, did you? So this is an interesting way to present information that a colleague of mine has included in her recent dissertation. And she has approached these major roles of community colleges. And you can see in the red column there, and it may be difficult to see on the size of it there. So you see these kind of educational components. These are things that we do in the classroom and through student activities and things like that. You can see that we're teaching systems thinking and we're teaching sustainable entrepreneurship, and we're planning interdisciplinary projects. So you can see those kinds of things that we know are part of the core business that we do every day and that people expect us to do. That's our educational value that we add in our educational role. There's kind of a strategic value that we play in the community as well, and I'll move in on that for you too, so you can read more easily. But these are values that we have not only for our student body, but for the community at large. And so you see some of these things like thought leader, structural leader and community pillar, mobility generator. And these are the kinds of things these are the kinds of activities that community college leaders identified as their values that they bring to their communities. And so the point here is that I take away from this, at least, is that this means that this is what the community looks to us as community colleges to represent, to put forward, to actualize, and so these are the expectations that our community has of us. And this is part of answering the question of why us, why a community college should be a convener. And this is important to understand because it's the piece that we're trying to connect through this kind of facilitation and collaboration. So I'm going to jump ahead for a second to this next piece, which is the pink area over here, which is where our students are headed. This is kind of the demand side of the equation. This is what the economic development and employment world is looking for us to be able to do, to attract and retain talent, to provide a pipeline of talent, to revitalize communities, to support entrepreneurship-led development and those kinds of things. So that's the pull that's happening with our students and with our communities, and expectations of those kind of corporate and capital markets. And so the important thing to me then is where this is what Samantha, the student, identified is this blue piece. And this is, I think, where we as institutions need to up our game. And when we do, that it helps us be that community collaborator, that convener of choice for our area. But what you can see some of these actions that are involved in here. And I want you to start reflecting on where you think your organization, where your institution, where your department, where your program fits in being able to do these things, because there are expectations that our community college has of us as an institution, And it is, this blue piece is the connecting piece between the jobs, the expectations, and the education. And so the way that this model flows is that that things move from not necessarily from left to right here or from right to left, but that they're constantly flowing between these ends of this periodic table, I guess you'd call it. But you can see how without this bridge in place, that these connections don't always get made. And that's sometimes why we don't succeed at reaching employers. That's sometimes why we don't succeed at reaching those markets and audiences and communities that we need to increase our diversity and access and inclusion and equity initiatives. And so this is the piece that we need, that I believe that we need to beef up. Not that we don't need to be good at all of them, but I think this is where our biggest gap exists. So I'll zoom that one more time just so you can see it. But they are things like convening conversations, emphasizing learning certification, acting as a catalyst for change, offering safe spaces, community problem solving, spanning boundaries. Those are things that community leaders look to community colleges for, and we need to be prepared to be able to deliver. The initial framing question that this chart represents from Samantha's research is, how do leaders of multi-stakeholder initiatives describe the role of community colleges in entrepreneurship, economic development, and addressing wicked problems of sustainability? And so these are those pieces that I'm going to focus on today. I'm hoping everybody's all right with that, or you're going to be really bored the rest of the time. So I always like to think about how we frame questions in terms of providing a scope for what we're going to talk about in anything, whether it's a collaboration or a meeting like this. And so let's reframe this question for a minute and frame it from the aspect of, how can we move this enrollment management idea from an institutional goal to a community goal? And let that sink in for a second, because why would the community care is the question, right? Why does the community care about our goals? Well, I'm sure many of you have answers to that, or I hope you do, because it's important, and what we do is important to our communities, and we want to make sure that we serve that. So how do we build collaborations around that rather than treating it as an institutional initiative? If we think of it as an institutional goal, then we will approach it as an institutional initiative. If we think of it as a community goal, then we will approach it as a community initiative, which means we need to have collaborators. I threw the My Future NC logo on here because that's a great piece that all of us have in common, where we've been asked to, as community colleges, to do our share to help those certifications of value and degrees and diplomas and post-secondary education attainment across the state and at a fairly intense level. And so those are community goals. And so you don't even have to think about what would a community goal be. One has been thrust upon each of the 100 counties through My Future NC, and it aligns highly with our own mission and values. So there it is, but there are many others like it. So I'm going to give you an example. So this is, if we're reframing this question of turning it from an institutional goal into a community goal, I'm going to give you an example of an organization that I facilitate. And it's a group called the Rowan County Education Collaborative. Its name is very descriptive. It is organizations within Rowan County who are interested in answering our framing question, which is, how can Rowan County create an agile talent framework that promotes prosperity for businesses and residents? You see that up there on the screen. And the idea of taking this from being a series of institutional goals to a community initiative is what's represented here in the collaborative. So what this group is, well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about Rowan County. Rowan County is one of those dichotomous areas, because we are education rich and attainment poor. And so what I mean by educationally rich is we have 3 institutions of higher education in a relatively small county. We have Livingstone College, which is an HBCU. We have Catawba College, which is a private liberal arts school. And we have Roy and Cabarrus Community College, the 8th largest community college in the North Carolina system. We also have the Roy and Salisbury Schools, which is the only renewal district in the state of North Carolina. And so with all those assets, it is puzzling to know that we have a relatively low and what we consider an unsatisfactory post-secondary attainment rate. And so the group was formed of this Growing Education Collaborative was formed of the presidents of those organizations. And those folks have been diligently getting together, the presidents and the superintendent of Livingstone, Catawba, Roy and Cabarrus, and Roy and Salisbury Schools, along with our economic development folks and 2 of our county commissioners, to answer that framing question and to actualize that into collaborations that promote access and reduce barriers to people participating in higher education. That group's been meeting for almost 2 years now, and has been meeting every 2 weeks with the presidents of those organizations. So we have a lot of buy-in, and that buy-in is around these 5 key focus areas that you see on educational attainment, career-ready graduates, work-based learning, and local jobs for graduates, and being an education community, kind of living up to that promise that we have in having so much access but so little participation. And so this group is really formed around the idea of taking incremental steps towards those goals. We don't have huge projects. We have small projects, but each one of them moves us incrementally towards those goals that you see on the right. And that this group has been actively collaborating and successful in making deliberate progress towards its goals. But mostly what they do is they did this piece, which was to reframe the question of how do we make the enrollment management goals of those separate institutions into a community initiative. We're now applying for grants and getting funding for initiatives to support those key focus areas, and we would not have been able to do that individually like we are collectively. So I always like to share this because it's kind of fun. Maybe you've seen it before. If you have, you're going to see it again. But I talked about incremental movement, and the idea of this education collaborative is to is to understand how we do what we call linking and leveraging. And linking and leveraging is taking our existing assets and finding out how we can solve a problem without going out and getting a grant or without doing all kinds of things. And so that incremental movement has really gotten us a lot of momentum. And I'll talk about the intangibles that come from this too, but the tangibles are things like 60 articulation agreements between the community that flow from the high school to the community college to the 4 years. We talk about joint recruiting, where we have people approaching the kind of lost generation of the classes of 2020 and 2021, whose college counseling experience was less than ideal, and trying to recapture them and get them into the college pipeline. And these are all collective activities. We submitted a grant for work-based learning to create a third-party staffing group to help employers more easily participate in internships and things like that. So, and to connect them with local employers. So it's little pieces that are all adding up, and the collaborative attitude is remarkable, because we do get the presidents of those colleges every 2 weeks for, on average, an hour and a half, and 2 hours one time and 1 hour another. So we get 3 hours a month from these leaders every single time. We have outstanding attendance, and so it means that they trust us or each other, and that they're making progress. And so let's talk about making progress. So I'm going to put on this video here and hope that you can hear it just fine. Let's make sure that, okay, we got volume, right? Okay. We'll peg it just so that you get blown right out of your seats. Okay.
Everybody knows about playing with dominoes, but what you may not know is that a domino can knock over another domino, which is about 1.5 times larger. So what I have here is a chain of dominoes. Each one is 1.5 times larger than the previous one. And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes. And the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds and is more than 1 meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
So that's really our approach, is this linking and leveraging what we already have, taking a step in the direction that we need to take in any of those 5 key focus areas to get where we're going. First of all, I'd like to say, didn't you wish that he was your physics teacher in high school or in college? Because I think we'd had a lot more fun. But anyway, the idea of just knowing where we're going, taking steps every day to get there, is what these collaborations are built on. So the value of those networks is listed here. I've always been interested in the connection of networks and the value of those networks. Think about the idea of enrollment management, and probably the most limited way you could think of it is in a transactional way. I go out and I find a prospect, I find a lead, I turn them into a prospect, I convert them to an enrollment, and we're done. That's what enrollment management's about. But if we think about how we network to do that, it expands our capability almost logarithmically by the size of the networks that we work with. And it allows us to reach groups that we wouldn't already reach. Our networks are closed, but they're connected when we collaborate. And so that's really important. One of the other values of these strong networks is the fact that you inherit trust. If you have a network that you have trust within, and I have a network that I have trust within, and we connect those networks, we essentially inherit the trust from each of those to both. And so it saves time, and it links and leverages those networks that we have and those assets that we bring together. Strong networks are also purpose specific. They are focused, and they don't let their scope go beyond what can be managed. It's important to keep, you notice that we had 5 key focus areas for the Rowan Education Collaborative as an example, as our kind of example child here today. Though that is what we limit our work to. If there's other things that come off, we dish it to somebody else and say, this is probably your area of work. That we align those resources, that we inventory and align our assets, and we know what we can bring together. And once we know what they are, we can share them, our assets, and then we can ultimately share value. And I think that's why we can still continue after 2 years, every other week, to get the presidents of colleges on a Zoom call for 2 hours. That's an important investment, and they're choosing to do it because this collaboration provides value to them that they couldn't get otherwise.
Craig, I got 2 things.
Sure.
One, someone's on there need to put their phone on mute, their computer on mute, because I can hear them working and sniffling. Two, as an institution, how do you identify those key strengths and areas if you don't know who they are? What kind of exercise did you as an institution go through to identify those networks and stuff of your institution?
Okay, that's an interesting question. We don't always, they don't always generate from inside. The Rowan Education Collaborative actually came from the impetus of our county commission, who was funding a lot of these activities and was also interested in economic development, and sat down with me one day and said, you know, we have all this education, but we're not aligned. What do we do about that? Okay. And so that kind of gauntlet that was thrown down and said, wow, you're right. We have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to people's accessibility, but their participation is low. What do we do about that? So sometimes it's often about listening. The other place I would look is in strategic plans. Strategic plans outline those key visions and aspirations that your institution has. And I would look at aligning those with others in the area. What are they really about? What are they trying to accomplish? The other place that I would look for this is data. And one of the places that I'd look for right now when you think about education collaboratives is the great dashboard that the My Future NC people have put together, and the ability to go out there and start to look at data. Data is not an answer machine. Data is a question machine. And data will begin to ask, beg questions that that may align with your institution. So it may be that you start to ask, well, why do X% of high school graduates not attend post-secondary institutions? Why do completers of career and technical education not matriculate to those CTE programs in a post-secondary way? Why do adults in our area only have an achievement level of X? And so those questions start to flow from that data. And I would really spend time. The My Future NC dashboard used to just be the things that they were measuring to kind of give you a scorecard, but they now have some really deep dive stuff that's that is intriguing and helpful to answer the question that Monty just brought up, which is, how do we know where to start? How do we know what our big thing? How do we know what our big issue is? And then from that you can start to say, who needs to be at the table? I'll also say that I don't know if I've got it somewhere else in here, so I'll say it now. But the who needs to be at the table is often an awkward conversation. And you'll notice that when I talked about the success of the Rowan Education Collaborative, it is those 4 educational institutions, the K-12 system, plus the community college and the 2 4 years, plus 2 other entities. And we have been asked to have all kinds of people included in it. And we include them through some of our committee work, but we have deliberately kept our focus tight, and we have not had a constituency by convenience. It's, oh, well, does the chamber need to be involved? Sometimes, but they're not really an education provider. They are an asset that we have in our community that we can leverage sometimes to reach some of our goals and help some of our projects move forward. Do businesses help? Yes, they do, because they provide the demand for our workers, and they describe the talent pipeline outcomes. But do they need to be at the table every 2 weeks? No. This is an inter-institutional group. And so I will say that the other thing that we learned was how keeping the ranks tight has kept our focus clear and not cluttered up our meetings at all. It's really allowed us to move in a fairly agile way and a fairly quick way. Does that help?
It did, yeah.
Okay. So my kind of pivoting question here is every community probably has a convener, you know, and I advocate especially in North Carolina that it should be the community college. It should be the community college. But I'm going to ask you first, who is your community's convener? Who's that group or that person who, if everybody calls them together, they'd show up? Sometimes they're mayors, sometimes they are foundations, sometimes they are business leaders, but who are they? But so look at them now. You may also say, we don't really have a community convener. That's really what we often hear, and others will say, no, it's us. But I'm saying that regardless of the answer that you give, the answer it should be, it's you. And so sometimes I call the community colleges, especially those in North Carolina, as the land grant institution of your service area. Okay, so those of you, the idea of a land grant institution is something that I really always recognized in those institutions that were funded through Moral Act and are actually land grant institutions. And they have a responsibility to their communities that they serve, initially to get agricultural and other information out, but now just in kind of general ways, community development, educational development, social, addressing big gnarly social problems and all kinds of things like that. And although we have a land grant institution for the state, most problems like this are local and are solved locally. And I believe that by default then, or hopefully by choice, that our community colleges serve as the institution that people look to. Some of the reasons to be look to be the convener. Some of the reasons that I would use to support that, you know, we do have a large employment base. Often we are one of the largest employers in the county that we serve. We are trusted. We are liked. Everybody likes the community college. They don't always go when we want them to, but they like us. And we are trusted. We also have public facilities that are good to facilitate public discourse and engagement and collaboration. Well, we're in the best position to work with a wide range of groups because we have interactions with employers, we have interactions with schools, we have interactions with community groups and diverse communities across our region. We work with people inside and outside our service area. We have multiple networks that we serve, whether, you know, that could be, you know, advisory committees or employers or you know, social service agencies and those kinds of things, that we have those connections established, and that we have the ability to build new trusted networks where they don't exist, but they're in demand. And so I'm saying that if you don't think of yourself already as the community convener, this is the time to start thinking that way, and start looking at where we can head. So the next question is, are you configured to collaborate? And so what I want you to do is think about if you are this group, how are you currently doing that? So what are your existing networks? What are your roles in those networks? Identify boundary spanners. I'll talk about boundary spanners in a minute. Evaluate membership and leadership in those groups, any missed opportunities that are there. So the next thing that we'll talk about is influencing your reputation. How do you train key personnel in being collaborative? Collaboration is not an intuitive skill, and it's not in many people's curriculum. So how do you get better at collaborating? And then how do you establish institutional goals to know that you're getting better at it and that you're leveraging that to your advantage? And then speaking of leverage, how do you become that go-to organization for community action? And how do you make your campus the presumptive location for meetings and events? These are questions that you should be asking yourselves to become better collaborators and partners. So one of the ways that I look at this, and this is kind of a series of tests that you can look at, but I have some goofy analogies, but we'll just talk about it by way of the chart here. But sometimes when people say, oh, well, we have a partnership with our school district. Okay, tell me about that. You're aware of the programs that they have, or are you actually sharing information? Are you working together? Is there evidence that you're working together? Again, tell me what you mean by we have a partnership. You see it so often in grant applications, and they don't really mean it yet. They can't prove it yet. They're not acting it. They're not living it. So the next question, the next step towards, so this acknowledgement to exploration. So you start to ask yourselves, you start to ask each other, what could we do together? What should we do together? What will we do together? And start working together. Oops, forwards, doesn't it? And then the next part is cooperation. You're still not collaborating yet, but you're sharing resources now. It might be that you put a career coach in the schools. It might be that you have some articulation agreements. It might be that you've got some dual enrollment. You've got a little thing going on. And then now you're co-executing. That's probably more where dual enrollment lives. That's where you're really meeting one another's needs in a single project. And then finally, co-creation is where you're saying what's really happening in our Rowan Education Collaborative when the group kind of takes on a personality and a direction of its own. And it's not my organization and your organization, it is the collaborative and it's moving ahead. And that's really where innovation comes from. And that's where some of these big projects that we believe will transform our area and are solving those problems and answering those questions of why are we education resource rich and attainment poor. So the other thing that happens as you go through this process and as you look at these stages of collaboration, as you move towards innovation and away from acknowledgement, that turfism decreases and trust increases. And so trust is the key component in these, and it's the key component in quality of outcomes, whether it's a short-term project or a long-term one. And it is the kind of the key indicator of the likelihood of sustainability of that group. So trust is important. And building trust is a key component of the facilitators of these groups and yours as a convener or a collaborator. And you can see what gets in the way of trust. You're aware of these already, but it's important to understand why building trust is important. The most important thing you can do to build trust is to do what you say you're going to do. Say something and then do it. That's how people gauge whether you're trustworthy. If you say you're going to do something and you do it, it lets you do something. It lets you do the next thing. It lets them move on to the next piece and trust you to do something bigger each time. So I talked about boundary spanners, and in their a really interesting article on networks in the Harvard Business Review by Cross and Prusak, it says, it really demonstrates well this notion of boundary spanners, and they're important to identify. Really what we're trying to do when we're building some of these larger collaborations is networks. We're finding existing networks and bringing them together to, once again, link and leverage for results. So it's important to know what those connections are to help us connect our networks. And so boundary spanners, in this case, Andy is a boundary spanner because Andy can connect to two different networks and add to the value of that. So boundary spanners are important people to identify. I'm kind of hustling along here because I just looked at the clock and realized I've been gabbling too slowly. So where to start in becoming a convener for these kinds of things? Identify those assets that your college is willing to share. And assets are interesting things to bring up. I don't know if there's anybody in here from the business office, but it's not that kind of assets. it can be money and buildings and things like that. But most of the assets that we're looking at are the ones I've listed there: people, space, time, relationships, trust, and reputation. What are the things that you're willing to reach out to another group, to span a boundary, to link and leverage, to solve some bigger problem? Okay. And how then, you need to always know internally, well, how will that benefit, what's in it for me? You want to know how that works, but as community colleges, those things that benefit our community usually benefit us. Building capacity for leading complex collaborations. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, in terms of what a good training path looks like to beef up your collaborative quotient. I don't. I laugh because I've never heard that term before. Identify those desired outcomes. What do we want out of this? What's important for us, and how is using this technique important for us to reach those goals, especially those goals right now around diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. Recruit those core partners. Don't try and get everybody together. You don't have to have a big session with 300 people in it with Post-it notes all over the wall. You don't have to do that kind of stuff. You have to get people together, and you have to get action started right away. And then, for God's sakes, don't get off the gas. Don't stop. So in terms of how to build that collaborative capacity, here's what I recommend. Here's a technique that, not a technique, that's a horrible way. Here's a philosophy that's really important around helping organizations and communities solve sticky problems in what's called the civic space. The civic space is that space where all these organizations come together, and it's not hierarchical, and no one can tell anyone else what to do. Like our Rural Education Collaborative. The president of our institution can't tell the president of Catawba College what to do, but we can get together and figure out how to do it if we use these 10 skills for agile leadership that are taught through strategic doing. And this is a book. It's a cheap book. It's an easy book. It's a short book, but it's very action oriented, and it's very transferable to lots of different people's skills. So this could be for a program chair as easily as it could be for a recruitment manager. It could be for an account manager in Con Ed as much as it could be for a vice president of student services. So it's applicable across a broad range of occupations and situations. I'd suggest that it could be a group reading project. Everybody gets together and you have 10 consecutive meetings where you talk about each of the skills for agile leadership, and you look at actionable items. There is an online training component through strategicdoing.net, which I really advocate. I put all of my business services account managers through it. So I put 9 or 10 people through it to do better work in the communities they serve, to look at forming industries, sector groups, and identifying common threads that could get people together. And just to improve your institution's capacity at leading, at forming and leading and participating in. You don't always have to lead them, but we do have that convening role that I talked about. Strategicdoing.net can tell you a lot of neat stuff about this. I would really recommend this as an action item, as a takeaway for how to put this kind of work to work. And Ed Morrison, the founder of that group, is the smartest man in the world. So let's go back to the top and remember that why are we talking about this? I think we talked about those things. That's me, and I will finally stop talking so that we can field any questions that might have found their way into the chat or otherwise.
Okay, I see no questions in the chat, but please feel free to ask any that you may have. Do not be shy.
Yes, So I will send the slides to Monty, and he can get them out. And the periodic table is in there. There are actually two of them. I'll send the second one as a separate email. One is about mission alignment with community colleges, and then the roles that community colleges play in those multi-stakeholder community-based collaborations. So I will send one that's embedded in the slides, and then I'll send a second one along with it.
Are we allowed to make a t-shirt out of it? It's a nice t-shirt.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said that'd be a nice t-shirt for community colleges.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. Yeah. The science of collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so with no questions being fielded through the chat box or online or from anyone, I would like to thank Mr. Lamb for his presentation. Thank you very much. It was very informative. A lot of information well used. And I want to thank Ms. Harris for introducing him. So if you have any other questions after this, please feel free to send me an email, and I'll make, or Mr. Lamb, and if you send it to me, I'll make sure he receives them. And you have any other questions about future sessions going forward, just email me, I'll let you know. The next session is going to be utilizing your data for enrollment management planning and decision making. That's going to be on April the 22nd. And that's going to be offered by Ashley Seaman, Elizabeth Stoddard, and Michael Faulkner of Surrey Community College. So again, with that being said, have a wonderful day. And I look forward to seeing you at the next session. And thank you to the Strategic Enrollment Management Task Force for putting all this together. Without them, we would not have all these sessions. So thank you, and take care, everyone.